Welcome to the Autism Blueprint Podcast. I'm your host, Janeen Hershkovitz, and it's my goal to help you create a more peaceful home while living with autistic and neurodivergent loved ones. Each episode, we focus on a different room in the house and help you create a peace plan for your home. So let's get started. Hello, friends. We are out in the community today helping autism professionals connect with one another. In this episode of the Autism Blueprint podcast, I had the pleasure of speaking with Dr. Kristin Sohl, the founder of Echo Autism. We discussed the innovative program she developed in 2015, which connects general practitioners with autism specialists through video conferencing to improve access to best practices, especially in rural and underserved communities. Kristin shared her insights on the importance of tailoring approaches to meet the unique needs of each individual on the spectrum and emphasized the value of presuming competence in autistic individuals. We also explored the challenges faced by educators and healthcare professionals in understanding autism and how Echo Autism fosters a collaborative learning environment for professionals to share experiences and strategies. Be sure and listen until the end, where Kristin offers a heartfelt message to parents, reminding them of their child's potential and inherent value. This episode is a rich resource for anyone interested in autism advocacy and the importance of community support. So let's get started. Well, Dr. Kristin Sohl, welcome to the Autism Blueprint podcast. How are you today?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much for being here. So for those who aren't familiar, can you tell us what Echo Autism is and how it came to be?
Yeah, absolutely. So Echo Autism is a program that we developed back in 2015 that uses essentially video conferencing to create a professional development network so that people who are more generalist in their practice, so maybe a general pediatrician, or there's lots of different types of professionals that we're working with, are able to get connected to specialists to better learn best practices and allow for access to best practice autism. Hold on, I'm going to pause for a second.
Sure.
So Echo Autism Communities is a program where we're trying to partner with general practitioners and specialist practitioners so that we're moving autism best practices out into rural and underserved communities so that more people on the spectrum can have access to the best practices that they need. So it's essentially a virtual learning community where we're working professional to professional, whether that's doctors, whether that's therapists, whether that's psychologists, what have you, to really think about building a better system for those that are on the spectrum so that they can have access to what they need, when and where they need it, without necessarily having to drive to major medical centers, specialty centers, and things like that.
Oh, that's amazing. So I love helping you get the word out about this because I think I haven't heard anything like this in the country. So when this began in 2015, you said?
2015, yep.
Wow. And how have you seen it grow and change over the years?
Yeah, so it's really changed a lot. Originally in 2015, I honestly started it for Missouri. I'm at the University of Missouri, and one of the things that I'm really passionate about is rural healthcare here in Missouri. But as a specialist who sees kids through at the time was seeing children and young adults through our autism center, it was very difficult to get our wait list under control. And so thinking through how could we change the way we do things, I set out to kind of try this model that was originally created by a liver doctor at the University of New Mexico who specializes in hepatitis C. He created this program called ECHO, which stands for Extension for Community Healthcare Outcomes. And then I saw a natural connection to what we were doing in autism. So I created Echo Autism. So initially, we were trying to think about ways in Missouri that we could empower primary care physicians and clinicians, so nurse practitioners and physician's assistants, to better understand autism so that they could serve kids who are already diagnosed in their community practices. That's where it started. And then fast forward to where we are now. I never really dreamed of what it's been able to do, but we are now in about 60 US institutions. So thinking about children's hospitals, academic medical centers are using Echo Autism to really move that knowledge rather than patients to them. They're using that the model, the Echo Autism model, to say, hey, we're going to partner our specialists, let's say at a major children's hospital, with generalists out in the community. And then it's kind of gone beyond that as well. So now we're in about 30 international locations. And really, yeah, it's been a huge collective impact story where it's not just me, right? Like I have a lot of expertise in autism, but I can't do this on my own. And so it's about thinking through how do we figure out how to empower specialists like me to say, I want to do something that is really expanding and extending my knowledge out into rural and underserved communities, regardless of where I'm at, right? So we have Echo Autism programs in Kenya, in Vietnam, in Poland, all over the place, lots and lots of growth in Latin America. And again, there are specialists there that have long wait lists, just like we do here in Missouri, just like many, many places have. And that's fine, right? I see the value in our specialty and I see the value in having specialists. But if we really are honest, right? Thinking about 1 and 2 year waitlist or even 6-month waitlist for diagnosis or intervention or therapy, as far as like mental health therapy, it's just not feasible to meet the needs of autistic people in their communities. So Echo Autism essentially says, hey, let's do this differently. Let's partner our specialty folks with generalists that are out in the community, upskill them to be able to provide the types of services that are needed in their community, and then see if we can't change that system.
Oh, I love that. That sounds like something that is so needed, and I love that it started as a grassroots
Yeah.
movement and then just grew. That's just
Yeah.
so wonderful. So it does sound like it's a great way for families to bridge that gap when they can't access a knowledgeable provider. So whether that's for an assessment, which is one thing, and then we have a lot of parents come to our practice saying, okay, I have the assessment, but now nobody can get me in, and I'm okay. My kid has an ABA therapist, but I need help for me, or I need help for the sibling in my family, or maybe the child has co-occurring mental health issues and needs counseling. I have so many people calling me saying, gosh, we don't know how to do this as an LMHC. And I think I'm one of the very few in North Florida that do. And it's growing.
Yeah.
But when I see them, I always think, gosh, I wonder how they were trained. Like, it's just, is that something that you see?
Yeah, all the time. And so that's the
Yeah.
thing that's been fun about Echo Autism is we started with this focus on primary care and trying to figure out ways to make accessible primary care pediatric practices, frankly, here in Missouri. And then now we have Echo Autism programs for about 15 or 16 different types of professionals. So just like you said, in most of our education for healthcare or frankly, education for educators, the training doesn't include things like how do you adapt your outpatient therapeutic modalities to include autism. So for example, CBT, DBT, things like that. They don't learn how to adapt that for autism in your usual college programs and even master's and graduate programs. So Echo Autism says, okay, but we know that you can. We know that there's lots of data to support the use of cognitive behavioral therapy and other types of modalities for autistic people and help to reduce anxiety, depression, suicidality, things like that. So how do we help to build a profession that understands how to do that and that they feel confident in their ability to do that and serve this population more broadly? So Echo Autism, we have Echo Autism Mental Health that is specifically for licensed mental health therapists that really helps them to understand, like, wait a second, I can do this, right? Like I have expertise in these modalities. And oh, look at that. Like, I didn't know that I could just tweak it this way or tweak it that way to serve this population. And so certainly that's been an amazing opportunity, even for me as a physician who has lots of patients who need access to qualified licensed mental health therapists. And so here in Missouri, we've had going on almost 100 licensed clinical social workers and LPCs and others who have participated in Echo Autism for mental health clinicians. So really building that network. And that's the thing that I think about related to and why we call it Echo Autism communities is that we're trying to build communities of both professionals and communities that are equipped, like literal geographic communities that have access to equipped primary care, equipped mental health clinicians, equipped psychiatrists, things like that. And by equipped, I mean that maybe they've always been an amazing, I'll say psychiatrist, but maybe they don't know anything about autism. And sadly, that's the case for most professions. Unless you go into the specialty that includes disabilities, most people don't have much knowledge about how to do what they do through the lens of autism. And so Echo Autism is all about saying, okay, well, we can help you with that, right? Like bring your skill set to the table and we will help you fill in the opportunities that allow you to serve autistic people.
I love that. So, what are some of the things that you found are different as far as approaching an autistic patient, especially a child, as instead of a neurotypical one?
Yeah. Well, honestly, we could go on for a long time about this.
Right?
I've been in
Could be a
practice.
whole episode.
Yeah, right. I've been in practice for about 20 years, and I absolutely adore the patients that I've gotten to be part of their journey. I think every child, and not to sound cliche, but every child on the spectrum truly does require individualized approaches. So for me, kind of just broadly speaking, I think the most important thing is that I want to meet that child right where they are, and whether they're non-speaking, whether they're hyperverbal, whether they're emotionally defensive, whatever, there's runs the gamut, right? And so what I do when I walk into an exam room is obviously first and foremost acknowledge the child. That's my patient, and then of course their parent or siblings or whomever else is in the room is also very important, but really trying to get a sense of like what makes them tick, so to speak. And so when I think about kids, for example, who are non-speaking, that doesn't mean I don't speak to them, or it doesn't mean I don't try to understand what they're doing. So one of my very favorite, I have a lot of favorites, but one of my favorite patients is a 16-year-old young lady who is non-speaking, but she loves watching YouTube videos that essentially are everything from playing with slime to cutting cakes to like all of these different kind of sounds and visuals. So I love it when she comes to see me. She does have aggression. She has a lot of co-occurring behavioral issues and different things, but I'll sit right next to her and watch whatever videos that she's watching. And I love that with her. Now, I don't do it for the whole entire visit. And of course, I do spend quite a bit of time talking to her parents. But at the same time, it's a connection between me and her. And so one of the things that I like to do with all of the kids and or young adults, because honestly, my oldest patient is now 30, because one of the challenges is finding them a developmental specialist, developmental behavioral pediatrician, the adult version. They don't exist exactly.
Right.
So I have a lot of people in the adult space, but nevertheless, one of the things I want to do is help everyone in the room, whether it's me, whether it's the autistic person themselves, whether it's the parents, whether it's my medical student or my residents. I want everyone to see the value in that person. So by demonstrating, hey, I can sit next to her and look at these actually, frankly, very fun videos to watch. I can also get on the floor and play with the kid as they're spinning the wheels on their tractor. I can listen to my patient tell me all about World War II, right? And like some very, very nuanced World War II information. And to me, that's fun, but it's also a way to model respect. So to me, it's modeling that respect for that person and their interests. It's what I would want somebody to do for me. I have lots of goofy things that I love. And, rather than just being dismissed, I love it when somebody at least listens for a second about what some goofy things that I really like to talk about. And I think that's a powerful opportunity for all of us to remember, is to find those moments to embrace what somebody is about. And I think that's important.
Oh my gosh, Kristin, that just warms my heart because what you're talking about is what I call presuming competence.
Totally.
Yeah, and it's just it's presuming the best in human beings, knowing that they're a human first and have the ability to learn and understand, even if they can't let us know that they can.
Yeah.
And it made such a difference. I have a son who's 27 and minimally verbal,
Mhm.
enough to get his wants and needs met, but he responds so much better when we speak to him like he's a 27-year-old,
Yeah.
and not like a 4-year-old.
Right.
And I know why parents do it, and I catch myself doing it sometimes. And it's because sometimes you get a reaction that you want, right? If I talk to him sometimes in a baby voice, he'll give me a hug and a kiss.
Yeah.
And so he's kind of trained me through the years. And so we've just started over the past couple of years making that shift. And and I'm a professional, right? I teach other parents this stuff all the time, and it's not easy because, like you said, one person with autism is one person with autism. But I love that idea of meeting them where they are, because they really give us no other choice but to meet them where they are.
I agree. And I think that I love what you commented on about your own journey with your son. Parenting is tough. So I have two, I have a 17-year-old and a 26-year-old, and that transition between little kid parenting and big kid parenting or adult parenting is very hard, I think, for all of us. And adapting our lens of parenting to the lens of a parent who is, parenting an adult is different. And it's interesting to me. And one of the joys that I find is the ironic parallels between parenting um, neurotypical kids and non-neurotypical kids. And so when you think about it, just as you described, it is hard to not see your child as your child forever, right? They are your child, obviously, but like to see them in that the parentification essentially. It's fun and it's warm and fuzzy to still treat my 17-year-old like a little girl, but at the same time, she needs me to move to a different level of parenting with her. And I think the same can be said. Now, of course, those that have significant support needs require significant support. So I'm not suggesting that, it's just like, oh, it's different than how I may experiencing parenting for my 26-year-old currently. But at the same time, they are a human that has gone through the life transitions related to puberty and adolescence, and their mind has continued to develop, even if they have significant developmental delays and disabilities and all of those things. So I do think it's really important as a parent to keep navigating those differences and those changes. And it's hard. I think it's hard for everyone as a parent, but certainly as a parent of someone who has, the equivalent of a developmental level that may appear to be more childlike.
Yes. Kristin, that warms my heart to hear you word it that way. I love it. I've been in the autism community probably as long as you've been practicing. And during that time, things have ebbed and flowed and changed and are still changing, which is the next thing that I wanted to ask about. So currently, at the time of this taping in America, our autism community can't seem to agree on a standard of care. And our government has its own ideas of what that should look like, which seems to either include studies and information that's either not properly interpreted or it's being spouted off by people who really have no business making these decisions because there's no training. What are Echo's guidelines as far as all of that mess? And what information do you feel should be shared and shouldn't? And how do you guys make that decision?
Yeah, great question. So, Echo Autism communities, we really see ourselves as a venue for professional development. So, when we think about what are best practices, we root ourselves very strongly in the professional standards for whomever we are coaching and mentoring to adapt those or adopt and adapt those practices into their programs or their clinical practice. So, for example, primary care best practices for autistic children are honestly no different than the primary care best practices for any child. So when we think about routine well child care, that's really important. Where I think the difference happens related to autism is helping professionals to see how you do adapt your standards of care to include people on the spectrum and their families. So, for example, a lot of the work that we do with our primary care colleagues is helping them to think about communication. How are you asking the best way to communicate with the child? How are you thinking about how to have a shared decision-making process with a parent and family and child, if that's something that typically it is something that they're able to contribute to, even if they're minimally speaking. So the best practices that we anchor ourselves within Echo Autism to are really the principles that have been long held in the disability space: shared decision-making, mutual respect, dignity, co-production. So co-production to me is where we are intersecting a lot with our current state of kind of affairs, if you will. So co-production is when you're really thinking through not just the co-production of research that is meaningful to the autistic community, but it's also in the exam room or in the therapy space where it's saying, okay, talk to me about what your goals are for your child, or if you're the person, what are your goals for for this moment in your life? If the goals are, I want to learn how to have a friend, okay, let's talk about what that could look like. If the goals are, I just want to learn how to, I would really like my child to be independently toileting, Okay, let's look at that. Let's talk about what that looks like. But co-production to me, co-production of care and discovery is how we talk about it within Echo Autism communities, is thinking about, does our research align with the needs of the community? And so, yes, you're right. Right now we have a lot of, I would like to think well-intended. I'm gonna assume positive intent at the moment, to try to figure out how we can meet the needs of this population. Sadly, I think that all too often we are caught up in the headlines of, autism rates are increasing, and frankly, there's a ton of details behind that headline that
Yes.
get picked. It's like cherry picking, right? And so,
Yes.
unfortunately, one of the things that we do in Echo Autism is try to support our clinicians, so our participants who are either clinicians or educators or therapists, or we do have Echo Autism programs for advocates, so self-advocates and family and caregiver advocates. We try to help them remember that this is a tough space. People have lots of opinions. There are real lives in the balance. We know that people who have profound autism have profound needs and have often been kind of left out of the conversation in some ways. While we also have people who have, frankly, they have the ability to speak up for their own needs, but they have a lot of needs too. And so I think as a community, I'm not autistic and I don't have autistic children. So it's, to me, this is a time where I can be a support to this community in thinking about what their needs are. And at Echo Autism, we are desperately trying to help everybody just think about, what's our North Star? If the North Star is helping anyone who's currently labeled as on the spectrum, right? So our current definition of autism is quite broad.
Mhm.
Our goal is that our goal, as in my goal as a clinician, and our goal as Echo Autism, is that autistic people all across that entire spectrum are able to live their best lives. And that may look very, very different for lots of different people. But our goal is to try to help aim towards that. I don't totally know what the pathway is going to look like. I have a feeling we're going to have some veering from particular paths, but at the end of the day, that North Star still exists. And I think we can all agree that we want to have autistic people be able to thrive in their community, whether that is, again, making sure that people with really intense or complex behaviors have the care and the support that they need, whether that is autistic people who are in a PhD program or are actively engaged in academic research themselves as a
Mhm.
researcher. We want all of them to be able to, again, live their best lives. And that may sound um, cliche or tongue in cheek, but it isn't. In our world within Echo Autism, we are actively trying to build the stepping stones so that no matter where you find yourself as a professional, as an autistic person, as a family member, that you can keep climbing to whatever it is that you think makes sense for you and or your loved one. It's tough. Right now is not a fun, or I would say not a time for the faint of heart, I would say.
Yes.
But it is a time for leadership, and it is a time for clarity.
Yes. And thank you for saying that. It sounds like Echo Autism is trying to be that voice of clarity
Yeah.
and reason. So
Yes.
that's a wonderful thing. So you mentioned a minute ago, and it just occurred to me, educators as well
Yeah.
can be served through Echo. Talk a little bit about how that works.
Yeah. So the cool thing about the Echo model is that really you are essentially creating a virtual learning collaborative. And the simplest way to think about it is you've got a couple of key components. You have a hub team, what we call a hub team of experts. These are subject matter experts in a particular topic. And you have generalists who want to learn a particular topic. So in education, for example, let's imagine, I'll use special education as an example. So elementary school special education, most even special education teachers aren't getting a lot of education specific to autism in their college coursework. They're getting some, but not a ton. So then that means they're entering the classroom with some basics, but they may not have all of the knowledge and the confidence in their skills to be able to serve the kids that frankly show up into their classrooms. So
Mhm.
Echo says, okay, well, let's pull together a team of subject matter experts, again, what we call a hub team. So for example, you may have a school psychologist. You may have seasoned special educators. You may have a BCBA who has knowledge about classroom supports for autism in the elementary school years. You may have a parent of a child on the spectrum who has, experience with working with their classroom, with their child in a special education classroom. You may have a special education administrator who understands the nuances of introduction, or not introduction, but of kind of regulations isn't quite the right word I'm looking for, but basically what needs to happen from a school administration standpoint. All of those people might be the subject matter experts. And then your participants, or what we call spokes, but participants on this hub and spoke model, are special education teachers that can bring their own examples from their own classrooms that are de-identified. So let's pretend for a second I'm a classroom teacher in a special education classroom, and I've got a child on the spectrum who keeps biting all the other kids. Just making this example up. Okay.
Yeah.
So, and let's say I've tried all the things I know how to do, can't figure it out. My only option currently has been to send the child home. Okay. Again, just kind of an exaggerated example.
But sounds familiar.
So sounds very familiar.
Yes.
And so I don't know what to do. And I've tapped out my local resources. So they can bring that example to Echo Autism Communities for Educators as an example. And they present a de-identified case. I've got a 6-year-old who's on the spectrum, who is minimally speaking, communicates, his communication style is, or he's 6. So let's imagine he doesn't really have much of a communication strategy. When a classmate takes their preferred item, this child bites them and runs out the hallway, right? Whatever. Okay. So, and maybe that's it. Maybe that's the only information that we have. So then the hub team engages with that participant. And by the way, keep in mind that in this learning collaborative, maybe we have 30 other special education educators that are also listening to this case, and thinking out loud about how to help this teacher with this child. But also realizing that the other 30 classroom teachers that are there to learn probably also have biters in their classroom, or elopers, or things like that. So anyway, we essentially then engage in this iterative process that's very interactive, and we start asking clarifying questions like, tell me a little bit more. So do you know when, have you looked at the behavior in relationship to the consequence? So it sounds to me like this child wants their toy back, and so they bite to get the toy back. Everybody freaks out and gives them the toy, right? Like thinking through all of these different steps. So I'm going into the weeds here, but the idea is that you're constantly sharing and iteratively working with this professional to build up their skills. And then at the end of that echo session, you're actually saying, here are some constructive recommendations you might want to consider. So for example, you might consider buying duplicate preferred objects. That's a idea. You might consider building in structured visuals that help this child know that right now it's not the time for your preferred item. It's Johnny's time for that preferred item, or whatever. Again, we wouldn't use names, but it's a different child's time. So like lots and lots of examples that are recommendations that this professional can now consider. But those are always rooted in best practices. And what's kind of fun is that hub team, or those subject matter experts, are always coming at it from their perspective. So you are going to get, for example, examples from the BCBA, who may have a very specific way of addressing that issue. You may have a parent who's like, yeah, that's lovely. We tried that with my kid. It never worked. And y'all still sent it home. Right. And then you're like, oh, yikes. And then we would have the opportunity to say, what does that feel like when your child gets sent home from the classroom? What does that do? Right. And so you're broadening the understanding of that special education teacher, as well as your learning community, to understand the impact of this behavior. Because, sadly, a lot of people are like, okay, biting, that's not that big of a deal. Yeah, it can be. If the only, I'm obvious. So says the developmental pediatrician who talks
yes.
about biting all the time. But like the concept here is broadening the understanding. We call it thinking in 360 of our professionals, to understand the impact of decisions that are made by professionals on the family, on the school administrator, on the, for example, again, in this case, maybe it's the school nurse. Maybe it's the school nurse who has to be the recipient of all the kids who've been bitten, and the impact of that, right? So like, anyway, long story short is it's this very broad professional development to help increase the understanding of that example, but then also extrapolate and extend that example for others to be able to learn from that. And so in the education space, there's so many examples. We have a behavior solutions in schools that we run. We have which is again very much a thought about biting, toileting issues, refusing to eat, sensory issues, all these different things that we are helping schools to build a larger repository of evidence-based best practices to meet the needs of that child. And then in some cases, it is nuanced, hyper nuanced strategies that maybe, nobody has thought about. Maybe it's a child who's refusing to eat. I could go on and on, because honestly, that's the thing that's so fun about autism, is that, wow, there's a lot to cover. And so really trying to build that expertise is very, very important. So lots of space in Echo Autism to be used.
Wow. So if I'm a practitioner who either wants to share my knowledge, or if my wheels are turning and I'm going, I would love to get our entire school district here
Yeah.
to be part of an Echo program. Where do we start?
Yeah, absolutely. So I love how you framed that question. So we have an entire arm of the work that I do, which helps professionals who are experts who want to build their own Echo. So that's the lovely thing. I joke that Echo is kind of like kindergarten. It's like sharing with abandon. And so depends on your kindergartner, but the idea is that everybody, it's like, hey, we know that there are deep disparities in access to care and access to autism inclusive care. And so certainly we don't have time to hoard the knowledge that we have built up. So we have one arm of our program and my team that works with content experts to build their own echoes to meet their own needs for their own community. So that's how we've expanded to 60 institutions around the country and 30 different countries, is by saying, you know what, we're going to teach you how to use this model. We'll teach you the pieces of it, and then we will support you as you launch your own Echo for, let's say, your school district, to use your example. That's one strategy that many people choose to do, and we love that. The other way is that you can join any Echo that's in existence. There are a few that are around the world that are closed because we might be doing research to figure out, like, does this work? Is this meeting the needs of our intended audience, things like that. But the vast majority are open and they're free. So you just literally can go to echoautism.org, click on join an Echo, find the one you're interested in, pop on. It's pretty awesome. And then that's how we learn together. And that's the thing that's really fun about it. One of the sayings we have is that it's all teach, all learn. So sure, I know a lot about autism, but I certainly don't know everything. When I'm with my primary care colleagues doing Echo, I learn so much from them, right? Because they're a pediatrician in a smaller community than I'm in. And they know that child, they know that family, they know their community. I don't. And so they teach me a lot. So for example, I typically have the availability of different types of of therapies for my patients. But in rural communities, they typically don't. So sometimes I fall into what I call Ivory Tower syndrome, where I'll be like, oh, this child needs, this Cadillac and this, that, whatever. And they're like, hey, Kristin, reality check. We don't have any of that here. And I'm like, oh, sorry, I forgot. Right. And so fortunately, I don't fall into Ivory Tower syndrome terribly often anymore. But at the same time, I'm constantly reminded by my network of Echo Autism community clinicians that, hey, remember, this family doesn't have gas money. This family doesn't have a car. This family, even if they had all of those things, we don't have anybody within an hour and a half that could do that for this family, right? So it's a stark reminder of access, but also outside of the box thinking. So then it's like, okay, they may not have that, but what about this? Or what about that? Okay, so this child has this need. I'm going to look into some strategies that we could use in the home or whatever, right? And so I like to think about it as this almost giant collaborative problem solving session that helps us to meet the needs of the individual that's being, again, de-identified individual that's being discussed, but then also just really expanding all of our understandings, mine included, of what life looks like in various spaces in our country, but then also in the autism community.
Oh, wow. That's just amazing. And I love that you say it's all teach and I'll learn.
Yep.
Is that how you put
I'll teach,
it?
I'll learn. Yep, exactly.
I think that's amazing because I find that, even though I've been raising this child for 27 years and I've been a therapist for 15 and I've worked in this community, I don't know everything there is to know. And I wouldn't even claim to
Right.
because we need to still have that humility of learning from one another.
Yes.
And if we can do that, we're going to learn so much more
Agreed.
than we would
And
otherwise.
I think humility is the perfect word because I can even say that in the last few weeks, given the time that we're in here in mid-April of in the United States, I've really tried to lean in to the conversation with humility. It's been a little hard at times, but at the same time, I've learned quite a bit, even in just the last 2 weeks, about different perspectives that I thought I knew, but now I'm seeing it in a slightly different way. And it's really kind of opened my mind yet again to different ways of thinking and frankly, more understanding and acceptance of different opinions. I mean, autism is tough. Autism is also awesome, but
Yeah.
autism can be very tough. And I think that what I hope is that we can all keep humility and appreciation for each other's stories, because I think that it's tough, and I hate seeing some of the dissonance that is currently happening across the autism community, and trying to figure out how to be a voice in that. One of the things I have been really also frankly deferring to in the last few weeks is the autism voices. So whether that's of the profoundly autistic and their caregivers and their loved ones, whether that's the autism self-advocacy groups, I think as a professional who does pretty routinely speak publicly and advocate publicly for this community, I feel like this is a time for this community to speak for themselves in a lot of ways. And so that's been something that I've been also really intentional about in the last couple of weeks. And not that I wasn't before, but I'm even more so right now, because I'm hoping that the people who are in decision-making positions in our country and in the world listen to them, because they're the ones that matter. Yes, I'm a doctor who cares deeply about autism, but at the end of the day, it's their voices that matter. And so I just pray truly that our leaders and those that make decisions about research funding and those that make decisions about, resource allocations and all of those things, I really hope they listen to this community, because that's what it's about.
Absolutely. Oh my goodness, Kristen, I'm so glad you brought that up because that was my next question is how are you using autistic voices in the information? And that's just, it's so important, I feel like. And, when I'm looking for either people to be on the podcast or people reach out to me, the things that I look for are they providing accurate information? Are they presuming competence? And are they listening to autistic voices?
Yep.
And you check all those boxes, and that's just amazing.
Thank you. And I appreciate that. And yet I also, it makes me sad that there's so many people in our world that don't check those boxes. And that's true. And I think that's something that your listeners can certainly think about as they're navigating whatever they're navigating, whether they're a professional who's listening in, whether it's a parent or an autistic person who's listening in. I agree. Like, I think that's how that's at least the basics of how if someone is kind of thinking about autism in a way that is meaningful, is how I would think about it. And, I think that we include autistic voices and those of all of the different types of lived experience on every single one of our content expert teams. So we have a firm stance that autistic voices and those with lived experience, so parents, siblings, caregivers, are equal to the professionals. So for example, our hub teams typically are around 5 to 7 professionals that always include an equal footing for a person with lived experience. So again, our Echo Autism mental health, which is for licensed mental health clinicians, includes an autistic adult. Now, of course, she doesn't speak for everyone, but at the same time, she has a lived experience that is equal to our psychologist and our psychiatrist and our licensed clinical social worker that are on that hub team. team. And we make sure that when we're training teams to use the Echo Autism model, so again, if you're wanting to make your own, that you know how to properly integrate that voice, not just give it a token, like, hey, do you have something to say? It's okay. Like, we're going down the line of our content experts, and always including the lived experience voice as we're discussing best practices with the intended audience. So again, whether it's a teacher, a nurse, a psychiatrist, a psychologist, whatever, we have so many different kinds of echoes at this point. But that's valuable. And part of why it's so valuable is it's modeling shared decision making. It's modeling, again, that co-production. So it's not just me as the doctor saying, this is what you should do. It's me potentially saying, hey, lived experience expert, here's how I think about it as a doc. How do you think about it? How are you seeing it through your lens that could help inform this professional or this intended audience's way of thinking about this? And again, that's where the all teach, all learn comes in, because I'm always learning from the different professionals that are there, especially the lived experience voices.
That's just amazing. Well, we could probably talk about, there's so many things I would love to talk to you about, but I want to be respectful of your time. There's a question that I ask everyone at the end of our conversations, which is, if every autism parent were listening, what would you want them to know?
Yeah. So I would want them to know that their child is amazing. I know that some days might be really hard. I know that some seasons of your life might be very, very hard. And I get that. And sometimes those seasons feel like way more than just a season. And yet what I would love for parents, whether you have a 2-year-old that maybe just recently got identified as being on the spectrum, or whether you have a 50-year-old who is, and maybe you're 80, I want you to know that the person in your life who's on the spectrum is valuable, is lovable, and has a place in our communities. And I think that plenty of people say that, but I think it's time that we really work as a society to do that. And again, not at all sugarcoating autism, because that's not fair to the many people who have very significant daily, hourly, minute to minute challenges.
Yes. Yes.
But at the same time, I do think that if we work as a society to say, oh, I don't have to just look at that person as, a challenge. I can look at that person and say, let me sit next to them and have them show me what they're doing. Or I wonder what their behaviors are trying to tell me. I may never know, right? But at the same time, I think that there are opportunities. And then what I would hope is that we can really, really work together to build professional expertise across all of the settings, so that it's not oh, I don't do autism, which I hear still far, far too often, whether that's the primary care clinician saying, oh, sorry, I don't do autism, or it's a psychiatrist, oh, sorry, I don't do autism, or a classroom teacher that's like, I can't deal with this autistic kid, get them out, right? Like, sadly, I hear that all the time, and it's time that just not be okay. But I think we have to also recognize that our education system for all of those different types of professionals is under preparing our professionals for what they need to know to actually do the work in the classroom. And so I hope that that's where Echo Autism communities can play a role. It's a role, right? It's not a fix all. It's not nirvana, but at the same time, I think it's a place. And so, what I hope is that parents who are listening, I hope they have hope. I also hope they continue to have courage, because courage and bravery, frankly, is hard, to speak up, to speak out, to figure out how to be an advocate for your little kid, your medium-sized kid, as I think about, and then sometimes your adult child. And where do you find that bravery and that courage to speak up? We hope that you can join any one of our Echo Autism programs. If you're listening, we have ones that are specifically for caregiver and or self advocates who want to learn how to navigate the systems, whether it's the educational system, the legal, the legislative, educational, whatever, so that you can be a more effective advocate. I certainly think there are opportunities there. End of the day, autistic people are incredible. And that doesn't just mean the ones you see on TV and all of the other, kind of stereotypes that sadly we often perpetuate. Every single person on the spectrum, as different as they all are, have a lot to offer each of us.
Absolutely. Well, and the final thing I want to leave our listeners with is that, is there a charge for the service?
No. So there's not. Now there are, I
Free?
will say, yes, so you can join an Echo Autism, always free as a learner anytime. There's one program that we do have a fee associated with helping other sites set up. So in other words, our early diagnostic program, we spent the better part of the last decade building and building and building and building a reputable program to teach our primary care clinicians how to recognize autism in the earliest of years. So it doesn't mean pediatricians have to pay to be part of that program. It means that if you're a children's hospital or you're an autism center and you're like, dang, we've got a 2-year wait list, we need to do something to get more kids identified so they can receive services. And if you want to use the Echo Autism early diagnostic model, there is a fee associated with us teaching you how to use it, but that's really it. And so
Right.
that has taken a lot of courage on my part to figure out how we're going to build a model that works like this. But so far, so good. And I think that we have a collective impact story that is really important. And so we're gonna keep going as long as we can, and building relationships and partners with lots and lots of folks all around in and outside of the autism community.
Oh, that's amazing. Well, Dr. Sohl, thank you so much for coming on today and talking about this. And I'm going to link to all of the things we talked about in the show notes today, including your website and the groups that parents can and professionals can take advantage of. Thank you so much for coming on, and best of luck to you with your program.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. It's been great.
The information in this podcast is not intended to be a substitute for help from a licensed mental health professional.